Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. Today we're talking with Curt Geier of the Working Class Bowhunter on a topic that we don't cover too much on this podcast, which is private land hunting. So we're talking with Curt and a little bit of Steve about podcasting in general, the perceptions of public land versus private land hunting, private land versus public land hunters. And we get into a little bit of tactics and gear as far as how to be successful on private land, and maybe a little bit of mobile hunting for the private land hunter. Real fun podcast to record, and they're great guys. If you're not following along with the guys over there, definitely check them out. But again, if you like what we're doing, follow us along on Instagram, Facebook, the like, and please write a review, give us some feedback, and tell a friend if you like what we're doing. And if you get a chance, check out our Patreon account. We're gonna start ramping that up here very, very soon. I know I've been saying that, but it's something that we are definitely working towards. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, and enjoy the podcast.
Shut up and sit down.
All right, everybody, Adam and John back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast with a very special guest on the line tonight, Curt Geier from the Working Class Bowhunter, with Steve milling around in the background. So how you doing tonight, Curt?
Good, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we did a podcast Sunday in the dark with no power and 8 inches of snow on the ground, and that's all gone now, and like what a difference a day makes. So it's it's pretty good day. So I guess for anybody that doesn't know, kind of they've been living under a rock in podcast land, or maybe they're an older listener who only listens to the podcast because we told them about ours or something like that. Kind of give a little bit of background on your podcast and kind of what you guys are doing over there. Cause you're almost setting the tone for the rest of the other outdoor podcasts from like a grassroots type thing that doesn't have, you didn't start with EXO behind you or something like that. So
yeah. Well, thanks, man, for that, for sure. No, Working Class Bowhunter Podcast. We've been doing it for just over 4 years. Been chipping away. We're launching, I don't know when this will air, but we're launching episode 300 this week. I feel like we are one of the first podcasts to bring that like true, real, raw hunting camp feel to the podcast industry, and been kind of sticking to that and honing to basically just trying to stick to as true to ourselves as we can and having fun, but trying to get some business done, trying to educate where we can, but making it fun at the same time, and really just kind of embody what hunting camp is. And like people who've never heard of our show, or like when we go to trade shows and we have our booth there, they're like, well, what's your show? I'm like, it's hunting camp radio. That's the best way to explain it. Like when you're giving your buddy shit and you guys are talking about strategy and learning from each other, that's our show.
Yeah, 100%. But you're not just doing a podcast now, right? I mean, you've kind of taken it one more step.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to branch in a lot of different directions. Like we do a video podcast series on Carbon TV, man, all sorts of stuff. We have a lot of things coming, rolling in the future, with just a bunch of projects we have. I don't know what you were bringing up, but I'm sure I'm just not thinking of it right now.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, I think as far as like the from the podcast realm, and especially from like that grassroots, hunting camp type feel, the fact that you guys have a video series on Carbon TV and are able to, transition, that sitting in the studio and be able to bring in, all of that other stuff. When we talk about, we'll do a video on this or look in the show notes or something like that, it's all right there for you to see, kind of like blended in. So that's kind of like a much bigger step into moving the podcast scene forward, I guess.
Yeah, for like doing the Carbon TV series, like it's more of a highly produced thing where we do like different cuts in while we're having the conversation, and that's a lot of fun. We're getting ready to launch our second season here coming soon on Carbon. And the reason why we do them limited there is because we just do super focused episodes for Carbon. But we are in future here in the next couple months, we're going to start rolling out a different video series where we're like, you'll see more video podcasts coming from us more frequently, or maybe even more live streams. We have a lot of stuff up our sleeve right now. We're just deciding where we want to whip it out at and get rocking with all this. But we have a ton of stuff in store to kind of show us all bullshit in the studio and having fun and really what it's all about, man. Just different hunters getting together and having good conversation and trying to include people as best we can, but mainly having a good time.
Yeah. I mean, I think with all the podcasts that are out there, and there's a million of them now, if you're not having fun and if it's too much like work, nobody would do it.
No doubt, because it's just too much work.
Right. There would be no point. So where did your podcast stem from? What are the origins?
As far as like, how did we just get it going?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I'm sure that it's just like everybody else, but I think 4 years ago, there wasn't, until maybe 2 years ago, I didn't even listen to any podcasts or anything, and it just kind of got the ball rolling. But I mean, 2 years before that, I mean, was it you listened to podcasts and you're like, there wasn't anything that about hunting or whatever? I mean, it just seems like now everybody has a podcast, but back then it was not a thing.
Yeah, exactly. So back then, just over 4 years ago, and it might have been 4.5, almost 5 years ago now, like going back in time where I started really thinking about starting a podcast. I was on a kind of it was a small film project. And I've always kind of like been involved in the industry in one small way or another, but from when I was really 15, 16, I was interested in it all. And then I started listening to podcasts, and not really so many hunting podcasts, but I looked up hunting podcasts, and really all of them were, the couple that were in existence were honestly just absolute just dog shit, for lack of a better term. They just weren't, they didn't relate to me. So some people they might have, but I was like this gnarly young BMX kid, and I like to hunt a certain way, and nothing really grabbed my attention. It was this very dry, like, welcome to the show and blah, 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 like just monotone type of show. And no one's getting into that type of thing unless you're 55 or older and you're just like wearing dad tinnies everywhere or something. So I basically was just like, well, there's nothing on here. And I kind of put up with it and whatever. And doing that little small online hunting project, I was on Twitter, and I don't know even why I did it. I'm glad I made this tweet. It's probably one of the best tweets or anything I ever put out on social media now looking back. But I put out this thing like, I think I'm going to start a hunting podcast. That'd be fun. And I got my interest in podcasting from other podcasts. And Steve, which is now one of the co-hosts on Working Class Bowhunter, he was on a comedy podcast back in the day, which, if you think about it now, is like even way before its time. Well, maybe not in the podcast industry in general, but for hunting, it definitely was. So he was on a comedy podcast, and I didn't even know Steve at all then, but he followed me through this online hunting project I did. And he kind of saw I had like gauges in my ears and a couple tattoos. He's like, oh, you don't see hunters that look like that normally. And he reached out and he said, hey man, I do this comedy podcast in Davenport, which is just right across the river from me, Davenport, Iowa. He goes, if you want to come in and see what it's all about before you start yours, come on in, be a guest and check it out. So I went in, and they had this really cool studio, and Steve had just started hunting at the time, and I did the podcast and had a really good time. And Steve's like, hey, if you're interested in doing this hunting podcast, I'd be glad to host it with you. Like, let's dive in. And we kind of just dove in and didn't know what the hell we were doing, and did our first 10 episodes and felt like idiots and just never looked back from there. That's really just like a quick summary of it.
Well, I think that's perfect, because I think for myself and John, we started listening to podcasts, and I've heard you say it a million times, but Rogan is the greatest, and he's probably spawned more podcasts than anybody ever.
Yeah, he's the GOAT. He's the OG.
And, John and I would sit over here getting ready for hunting season or whatever, talking about bows and everything. It'd be 2-hour conversations, and it would be conversations just talking about the things that we heard on other podcasts and things like that. And we kind of felt the same way, that there wasn't anything that kind of like represented us. And now this is 2 years into your podcast.
So you're saying our show sucks, so you started your own, huh?
Well, I think, honestly, it's one of those things where why do people resonate towards YouTube or something like that? Is because when you see people sitting on the same field edge, the same whatever, well, I think at that point, you guys were so far down the line when you're talking to Waddell, Dudley, if I'm going to start a podcast, it's like in this garage right here, it's like, I'm just going to call up Michael Waddell and be like, hey, Michael, you want to come on here and listen to, speak to my family, because there will be nobody else that listens. And, when you guys are putting up pictures of, all these 140s, 150s, all of these things, it's real easy to garner that. Well, they're in Iowa, they're in Illinois. That doesn't resonate with me. And at the same time, that was at the time when there wasn't that many podcasts, and we decided to wait 6 months and kind of like what we feel is to like do it right, to make good quality audio, not just, record on our iPhone and put it out there and, whatever, try to actually produce something. And, it just turns out that everybody and their fucking brother did the same thing at the same time. So there was this giant influx of all these like, well, fuck, there's no, podcast that speaks to me. So now we're going to have this whole, like all these little microcosms of, we're speaking to this real minute group or whatever.
Well, it's funny you say that, because hunting podcasts are going through the same thing right now that hunting shows went through 3 years ago, 3 years ago, where all of a sudden everybody has a hunting show. And then you realize everybody that's about it stuck around, everybody who's not about it faded out. Podcasts are going through that same thing right now. You'll see this whole big blast of podcasts will happen for 2-3 years, and then people are too busy, and then it'll go away and fade out. So it's kind of the same, like just trendy, anything to do. People see certain people gaining popularity, and they're like, well, I'm a badass hunter, I'm going to do the same thing. And then they have a podcast, and then they get tired of it, and it fails, and it hits the dirt. And then so there'll be something else down the line in 2-3 years in the hunting industry that'll do the same thing, and the same people that have been around will be around and will always be around. It's just the way it is. There's just that certain – you only have so many people that have that mindset to really achieve what they want to achieve in a certain – in any industry, in my opinion. But it's all good. Like what you're saying, like, if you would have started 6 months earlier, you would have been a little ahead of the curve on all this big blast of podcasts that came out. And I think about that too, even looking at all the podcasts when I went through a hunting season, and Steve texted me every day, let's get this podcast going, dude. Let's get this podcast going. It's November. And I'm like, no, dude, I'm hunting. I don't have time to go buy a fucking podcast gear. Like, and if I would have started it 8 months before instead of putting it off, who knows what could be different now. But I'm not saying I would change it, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, and I mean, I was like the exact same way. I was like, as we were getting ready for the season, we like sparked this idea, and then it's like one of those accountability pieces where you say, all right, well, first of the year, this is when we're going to do it. We'll get through hunting season. We'll have all this stuff to talk about. We'll kind of go through there. Well, it's like everybody and their fucking brother said, well, as soon as fucking hunting season's done, that's when we're busting out our iPhones and we're going to start recording some shit. So it's like, but that's neither here nor there, because I've 100% seen that, people that have the drive and these, I've met so many great people that are just doers. That's the one thing that I didn't expect to gain from this experience, is like, if you surround yourself with people that are doing things, and it like helps to like build you up and keep you motivated, where there's so many people that say, well, you're going to do that and it's going to fucking suck. And it's going to, it's like, I don't have time for that anymore. Like, I got shit to do,
Well, that holds you accountable too. I mean, now that we talk about stuff, it's like, shit. Well, last year we kind of got caught up in it. We were talking about turkey hunting, and then I didn't even buy my turkey tag last year. It just came down to, the weather was shit at the beginning of the season, and we picked the last season, which is the longest. And finally it came down to like the last 2 days. I'm like, screw it. But after that, we're like, well, when we talk about this shit, we need to freaking follow up and, follow through on it. So, I mean,
yeah, and we were so well versed, like we were 100% like into our elk hunt. We did our first Western hunt, our first elk hunt, DIY. Just went out and did it, and we were so focused on that everything else was kind of like secondary, and that came before deer season. So that was the main focus of basically the whole year last year.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
yeah, I kind of did the same thing last year too. It really channels your attention elsewhere when you got a hunt like that planned.
Yeah. And so kind of going back to, hearing your podcast and kind of like were you saying there wasn't anything for you, and then us hearing what you guys were doing. And on some level it was just kind of like intimidating, like, all right, well, we can't be working class bow hunter because, we don't have 150 class deer wandering around, and that doesn't speak to us. But I think the farther that I get down this road, and I've heard you talk about it too, is like I'm ending up seeing that there's more like hunter infighting and I guess I always thought like, and I grew up having a piece of public or a private land to hunt, and it was rifle hunting. I mean, we bow hunted a little bit, but the focus was never, killing big bucks. It was just killing deer. And we were in the highest populated area for does in the state of Michigan. And so it was just a given. So it wasn't like there wasn't a whole lot of real hunting. And I never got bit by that big buck bug. So there wasn't, and there wasn't, they weren't around. I mean, sure that they were somewhere, but it wasn't part of my life. I wasn't seeing guys bring home these big deer, everywhere around me, where it was like, I need to emulate that. And so I always thought when you go out of state or Iowa, Illinois, that's just, they're a dime a dozen. They're so easy. And the more people that I talk to, like through the podcast and things like that, I realize that maybe it's almost harder, or that you have to have a little bit more focus or whatever. So I wanted to have that conversation with you as far as like your experiences hunting private land and your style of hunting, and then, your experiences on public land, if you've had any, and kind of what your, I don't know, thoughts are on the industry, the way that it's moving towards, if you're not hunting out of a saddle, paddling in a kayak and vlogging it, then did you even really hunt?
Doing it on public land.
Yeah, that is trendy right now, which is cool. It's cool, like the grind of it. That's a good thing because people realize like it does take hard work to kill big deer. And first I want to touch on, from my experience, the deeper you get into the industry, because I personally feel that I'm in the industry more than just my podcast. I feel like I'm in it on a business aspect as well, and in other avenues. And what I'm learning very quickly is the deeper you want to get into this industry, the less you have time to hunt. And so, but in my mindset is, I would take the trade-off to be surrounded by hunting people and hunting things all year and get to hunt a little less during the season than to never be around it and get to hunt as much as I want for 2 months a year. So that's something to think about if you're wanting to get into the industry heavy. But like touching on the trendy thing, like you just want to start like the private versus public thing.
Yeah. I mean, wherever you want to start it. I mean, I'm just thinking, like I said, my first impression from your podcast was just like it wasn't anything that I could get behind, in a sense of, I always thought, if I got a lease in Iowa or Illinois, then, there's a 150-inch deer around every corner, and it would be super easy. And all it takes is money. Yeah.
Yeah, let's start there. It's definitely not the case. It's easy to see that. Just like I've hunted public land in Colorado, it's just easy to see when you watch some of these guys killing 280-inch bulls and bigger, Pope and Young and bigger bulls on public land. It's they're not around every tree. You're gonna have to put the grit down, and I knew that they weren't around every tree from just how it is whitetail hunting in Illinois. I grew up in Illinois, nor like central. Like northwest central Illinois, I guess. And a lot of people that don't live in the Midwest might think like 150s are everywhere, and they're not. And I know a lot of people that have hunted for 30 years and have never killed a buck over 135. And I could rattle off names right now like you wouldn't even believe. And I'm sure there's people that don't live in the Midwest that are like, really? And now it's true on private land too. It's just one of those things. It's how bad do you want it? How deep do you want to get into it? And I know a lot of guys in this area that do kill big deer on public land, public and private. And I think it's mindset and knowledge are the two things. I grew up hunting private ground in Illinois, and I've killed some big deer, and they definitely haven't came easy. I'll tell you that. And that's kind of my thing. When people that hunt private land look down on people who hunt, or who hunt public land look down on people who hunt private land, like it's like in the bag. And my response to those people is, well, apparently you haven't hunted long enough, or you've never hunted private land to get how this whole thing actually works. Because if you know mature animals and how they move and their patterns and what happens here and there, you know that nothing's guaranteed. So even if you have a buck patterned, private or public, every night he's doing this, the one night you sit there, that buck might go to the other edge of the field, disappears, catches your wind, butts out of there, and you never see him again. That's just the reality of it. They're wild animals. They can do whatever they want. So when I hear that argument, well, you only kill good deer because you hunt private land in Illinois, but they don't know how many hours I sat. They don't know how all the homework I did, all the scouting, they don't know half of the shit that I did to get and put in work to get this done and be successful. Or sometimes you're not even successful. But when someone gives that argument to me, I see lack of experience personally. And I just think that's because they just don't get how animals move. They don't get whitetail hunting in general. But there's a lot of people that hunt public land exclusively, which I think is badass. Like, if you kill a big buck on public land, that's badass. Like, that's cool. Like, it adds that touch of coolness to it over a private land buck. I get that. But people who are doing that understand how things are in hunting, public or private.
Yeah, I mean, my experience, like growing up, like I say, was, we had 240-acre cedar swamps surrounded by public for the most part, and we hunted the same spots, the same times, every single time. And so hunting wasn't hunting as much as it was just sitting. And there was a lot of the deer camp experience. That's still why a lot of guys still go up there, and that's
the Americana of deer hunting.
Yeah, that's right. The traditional deer camp, mentality. Go up, sit in the same blinds every year, and then like you guys did. You guys had like rules or whatever, like, oh, you can't even go over there,
Yeah, like just crazy stuff. But I think 100% it's the lack of knowledge. Because like I say, like now, the further that I look into it, and the more people that we talk to that are actually doing it even on small pieces. And again, I also think like everybody's got land. I mean, not now, obviously, but I think at that time, and I think a lot of the misconception is everybody has land like Lee and Tiffany or the Drurys. Everybody's got these giant pieces of managed, property that they hunt, where it might just be a 40 or an 80 or 60 over here. And I think on some level that would probably make it that much harder, because that deer only has to go across to your neighbor's property, and you've got no control over that, Yeah,
well, it just adds a different skills are applied differently to what property you're hunting, So I've talked about this on several podcasts. If I have a 40-acre lease and that's all I can afford, and whoever, Joe Schmo, hunts an 800-acre piece of private, when he goes in and bumps a deer, he has more opportunity to chase that deer around and kill that deer. Well, that doesn't work on a 40-acre piece of private, because you go in and jump that deer, he's off your piece and you can't hunt him anymore. He's in the neighbor's hunting realm now. So I think people forget that when they talk shit about, like, well, the public versus private, like if you hunt private, that's in the bag. Well, hold on, dude, because it's just different. It's a different type of skill set. You might idolize this person that hunts this public ground exclusively, and they have this set of skills, and they might chase this deer all around. Like, look, for example, and I love the dudes from Whitetail Adrenaline, how they hunt deer does not work on private ground. You get an 80-acre piece of private, 100-acre piece of private, and hunt them like the dudes of Whitetail Adrenaline hunt, you will not kill a deer. You might get lucky, but consistently, you're just pushing deer off your property for the neighbors to hunt. It's a different set of skills. So it all depends. It's all perspective. How do you want to look at it? If I went on my lease, which is a very humble, not a great piece of property of 80 acres, if I go in like an idiot and jump deer, I'm not seeing much to hunt, not even does. I have to be very strategic when I go in on my entry and exit. What's my wind doing? I have to be very, very strategic. If I bump a deer, especially a mature buck, it could be game over for me. You know, versus if I go on a 1,000-acre piece of public where I could go in from one way, jump deer, because I think everybody else is jumping them. I'll walk in like an asshole too, jump them. Well, then I'll come in from the other way like an asshole because everyone else is doing it, jump them. And then you have your guys that get how things work, and they slip in a certain way, hang and bang, and they're killing big deer. They get how it works. It's all perspective, really, and how you want to apply it and what you're trying to get done. So I don't think there's room for anybody to talk shit on anybody in any situation with this. It annoys me, I think, as you can probably tell by my tone, this back and forth thing between public and private guys. It just depends. You know, guys that are hardcore in their public area know how to hunt those areas. The same thing with private land guys.
Right.
Everybody's got a different skill set.
Right. Especially like you're talking, you know, your lease or whatever, the 80 acres. There's probably days where you don't even hunt because the conditions aren't right because you can't get in. You're going to, you know, you're going in on a bad day, you're going to bump the deer and then you're done. So,
exactly.
You know, guys that are hunting public, like you're saying, well, shit, I'll go in if I bump some deer. Oh, well, you know, some guy coming in the other way might bump some back to me or something, you know, I mean, or if you screw up that spot, you drive around, you know, 5 miles around the corner and sit a different tree. But you can't do that on a small piece of private. So,
yeah, you know, it's just different. And there's a lot of guys, especially like new hunters. There's a lot of new hunters that don't have the opportunity to hunt private, and they're forced to hunt public, which I think will advance your skills as a hunter quicker, maybe, because it makes you have to be more conscious about what moves you make. But I also think it has a tendency to make people really sloppy in the moves they make because there's always that mindset of, well, the neighbor's doing this. You know, it'd be like the example would be the private land guy. The neighbor's doing this, and he's shooting this, so I might as well shoot this. Well, if the public land guy thinks, well, this guy's walking through there like this, it's a never-ending circle. You're chasing your tail.
Right.
With the kind of way that you hunt and the size of property that you're hunting, what kind of techniques are you using, or what, you know, when you say that it's a different set of skills, you know, that sort of thing, you know, because we've got, I think Michigan here, we've got a lot of public land. I mean, there's no shortage of that, but I think for the most part, the guys that are hunting private portions are real small acre, you know, 10, 15, you know, 80 would be a good chunk. You know, the property that we have is just, you know, it's because it's in the middle of nowhere in the Upper Peninsula is why it's such a big chunk of land. And you know, we've said it on here before, but it's easier for me to get to, you know, giant country in Ohio. It's a shorter drive to get, you know, to Ohio and chase real big bucks than it is to go to my piece of private land, you know, up in the UP. So there's a real trade-off between the whole, you know, am I going to hunt monsters or am I going to have an experience of a deer camp? But, you know, there's a lot of our listeners that are hunting these smaller pieces of property that are maybe not as successful as they'd like to be. And they're starting to, you know, kind of hear kind of what all the guys are doing around the podcasting and social media and stuff like that. And they're trying to venture off onto public. You know, what are some things that you've done on the smaller private pieces to be successful, or to kind of ensure your success as best you can?
Yeah, man. I'll be honest. I've talked about this a ton, and so it's going to sound super cliche, and it's always like that. I feel like this answer is just thrown out there a lot, but what it boils down to, if you have a very small piece to hunt, is constantly think about what kind of pressure you're putting on that area. And this is just my experience. This might not be the go-to, and there's some people that might have a completely different experience than me, but in my experience, I try to minimize pressure as best as possible. So come August timeframe, I'm not willy-nilly walking around the middle of the woods and fucking with bucks that are in velvet and walking through the center of that property just because I got nothing else to do and I want to post pictures on Instagram like summer scouting. I don't do that shit. I'm in the woods very minimal at that point of year. And then when it comes to hunting, wind is my friend. Entry, exit, and wind. I'm always on that shit. If you have 40 acres and the wind's bad and you hunt just so you can hunt and post a picture, out here grinding, and the wind's blowing where the deer are at, you're just fucking shit up. That's all you're doing. You're not doing any good. It's almost to the point where like less is more when you have a small piece. And that's what I grew up hunting. And I've learned over the years, deer are fringe animals in general. So if you can hunt fringes of your property and you can take advantage of that and kind of keep out of the center of it and not be out there unless you have to type of thing, I think that's going to go a lot further for you than you might realize. In time, especially, it sucks because you want to be out there, but I think if you just minimize your pressure, hunt the fringes, but not always hunt the fringes. Make your moves when you got to make your moves when the time's right. Don't be afraid to get aggressive. But it's all just kind of feathering that throttle when to really push it to the floor and get in there and get aggressive. It's a weird equation that you have to master. And I don't have it mastered. That's for sure.
And so that being said, how are you with that minimal impact outside of time, years on the property, etc.? How are you locating, hot sign, the best areas and things like that? Are you just saying, okay, this looks good? I mean, a public land guy walking onto a piece of property where he's never been before, or maybe it's another state, is studying the maps and figuring this out, and you're dropping a pin on your Onyx, and you're walking in there and saying, okay, and then you're observing, maybe once in April, March, and then when you get there, when you have access to this all year round, how are you locating like the best places without going in there and dicking it all up?
A lot of it is, and this is one of those answers you hear all the time, is I study maps, like I study Onyx and hunt stand like a motherfucker. Even if I know the ground, I'm already studying, looking for some hidden gem. But really a lot of it is like during season, like in-season scouting can help. If you're going to hunt fringes like early season, once it gets like late October, even mid-October, it depends on where you're hunting, that's when you can kind of see what's happening. And then if you got to dive in and push throttle to the floor, do it. The obvious buck sign, you should know where deer are feeding, where deer are bedding. If you don't know, it's easy to set up an observation stand, play the fringe game, and then throttling in from there. Really, it's just kind of, I feel like it's like pretty basic, obvious stuff, but maybe it's not. But it's really just kind of feathering and observe what you have. And then some of it even too is guess and check. If you don't know, hunt it, throw a stand up, see what's going on. You're not going to know until you see it firsthand or learn or see sign firsthand. Sometimes you just have to get in there and take a risk. It's nothing's definite. So like everything, in my opinion, like if I'm saying, oh, stay away from the fringe, be on the fringes, stay away from the center. That's not always the case. Sometimes you got to throttle down and get in there and put an arrow in something.
And so what has your experience been on public land, or how much public land hunting have you done?
For whitetails, very minimal. Where I live, I have public land north of me about an hour and south of me about an hour. I scouted the public piece last year a little bit, and it looked good. My buddy hunts private just outside of the public, and I know it's a decent spot, but I haven't even hunted it yet. I have it there, and it's not far from one of my leases, so if I got to dive in, I'll dive in. But for whitetails, very minimal. I hunted elk public land last year, and this coming year I'll be hunting antelope and mule deer on public.
Okay, so how did your elk hunt turn out? I mean, was that your first elk hunt, and how did that go?
Yeah, I went to Colorado over the counter and hunted I think I hunted mid-September. We went just an over-the-counter unit in Colorado, so it wasn't like a draw unit or anything like that. It was awesome, man, but didn't get an elk. But that goes back to the point, like I knew if I'm going to get a 280-plus bull, it's going to take some work. But yeah, it was a good time, man. It was a great learning experience.
So did you, like with your elk hunt, did you backpack in? Did you have a base camp?
Yeah, both. Yeah, we had a base camp. We backpacked in and did the whole mountain house and try not to get the shits game. So,
so did you end up having to buy all new gear also? Like,
there were not all new gear. Like there was stuff that I didn't have that I needed, like a good pack and a bunch of mountain house and the shit that you would need that you wouldn't normally need when you're whitetail hunting, like overnight type stuff, lightweight stuff. A tent. We didn't have a tent. I didn't have a good sleeping bag. Stuff like that.
Good boots. How about that?
Yeah. I had to buy a new pair. Well, I didn't. Yeah, I did. Actually, I did have to buy. I bought Crispies. When I hunt whitetails, I'm a rubber boot guy, like a knee-high rubber boot. But I wore my Crispies this year whitetail hunting and absolutely loved them.
How'd you like them out west?
Oh, they're great. My only complaint, I wish I would have got a little taller boot.
Right. Which did you get the Thors?
Yeah, I had the Thors. I wish I would have got the Idahos.
Yeah, I bought the Thors as well, and they were great when we were training all summer, like around here in Michigan. I mean, we have dunes and stuff, but we got out there and they definitely didn't have the ankle support that I needed.
Dude, I felt like a baby giraffe coming down the mountain in the dark, and my dad's got the Idahos. He's like, your ankles are that bad? I'm like, yeah, motherfucker, I got no ankle support, dude. I'm fucking tripping over myself.
Oh, man, I twisted every night coming back to camp was just a miserable trek, man. I mean, my
isn't it funny?
Adam's up there, and he had the 10-inch, high leathers, and he's just freaking. I'm like, don't wait for me. I'll just see you when I get back.
Yeah, that's what happened. I was with some boys, some of my friends from South Dakota, and even my dad had the Idahos, and they're ahead of me. I'm like, man, I've never felt like I had weak bitch ankles before, but right now I do, man. It was tough. It was only like the end of the day. Like I was pretty solid most of the day, but we did a couple hikes where we went in after an elk and we ended up having to come back down to where we set up camp down this like mountain, and I was just like getting ready to roll over myself down this fucking hill. I'm not kidding. I felt like a newborn giraffe there for a minute.
Yeah, me too. I grew up playing hockey, so I mean, but it's been 10 years since I played, and I was like, when we're walking down, it felt like a 3-year-old on skates for the first time, just wearing figure skates with no support. Like,
isn't it funny, man? It's such a wake-up call.
Yeah, then when we went down to ATA, I went to the Crispy booth, and I was like, all right, I bought your Crispy Thors, and, tell me about them. He's like, where are you from? I'm like, Michigan. He's like, how'd that work out for you? I'm like, not very well. He's like, yeah. He's like, they're great boots for the guys that live out west and do it every day. He's like, but you're probably rolling your ankles. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. He's like, well, I got a boot for you. They came out with a new one it looks just like the Thor, but it's got all kinds of ankle support. I mean,
was it the Colorado?
It might. I can't remember.
I don't know. It was whatever the new one that they rolled out this year.
I think it was the Colorado. Maybe I'm wrong.
It was like, it looked just like the Thor, but it was like black with a gray trim. And
I'm gonna see if I can pull it up here.
And it was definitely. I'm like, well, I think I'll be ordering.
They're nice boots, man. I'll definitely buy another pair.
I mean, mine are sitting right here on the step in the garage here, and I mean, I wear them every day walking the dogs, and I wore them, a little bit during whitetail season, but I wear the same knee-high rubber boot for most of the spots that we're hunting.
Everywhere I go this year was water over my boots. Like, I mean, this was the first year that we really so we were always hunted from a climber. And so we switched over to the stand and sticks, basically to solidify the fact that we were going to change up the way that we were hunting. Like our hunting style, like we weren't just going to search for that straight tree, et cetera, et cetera. And what ended up happening was everywhere I went, that was a place that I had looked on Onyx was over my boots or up to my nuts in water. And like I went over hip boots. I was like, okay, well, I guess this is what it's all about. Now I'm a real hunter. Like, it's like, that's what social media says. But yeah, but I hunted less and had the most successful season that I've had in Michigan for sure. And, there was just something to be said. It was like, I felt like I got lucky, in some degree. And, people say, well, you put in a lot of work, luck usually favors the hard worker, so you worked really hard for that luck. But at the same time, it was like, I'd go into a spot and I wouldn't see the sign that I wanted, and I'd just walk right out and go scout somewhere else, just, because I wasn't going to waste my time. And it just, I don't know, it paid off. But it was that stand and sticks on my back where I think if I would have had a climber, I would have just got up a tree because it would have been a lot easier. But I guess that was one of the things I wanted to ask you. Being on public or on private land, like what are your stand setups? Are you going in and setting up stands? I was seeing you've been doing a lot of stuff with Lone Wolf custom gear type stuff, where that's not typically set it and forget it type stand.
Yeah, man. My dad and I have always had that style. We bought a Lone Wolf setup back when I was a youngster, like 15-ish, and that's always kind of been our style, like that hang and hunt style, and not be scared to move around and guess and check and try different areas if you have to. And yeah, I mean, honestly, we do have our sets that we leave up, those big like terrain feature, like pinch points or just areas, deer move in and out of that are going to be like that good go-to spot like that, or that light pressure spot. Like for example, I set a ladder stand up, like a bow hunting ladder stand set up for my wife on our lease. That was, you walk down a mowed trail and you can just dive into the woods, and it's 5 yards inside the timber and it's super low pressure and she can just get out there. I have those setups. And then there's like last year I kept a Lone Wolf in my truck at all times. I might make the call like, I sat in this one stand that I would consider an observation stand, and I saw a buck move out and do something over there that I was like, well, maybe I can get in on them the next day. And I would go and throw a stand up and hunt that. So that's like what that Lone Wolf custom gear stand will be like. That'll be the stand that stays in your truck. So if you're sitting on an observation stand, even if it's public or private, and you see a buck do something, you're like, man, I bet you he's going to do that again. You grab that thing and you throw it up and you go in, maybe you come out with it and make a different move from what you saw that night, or you keep it there and go back in the next morning or whatever. So I do a little bit of both, man. You can't count anything out, and then there's always a stand in my truck. Always.
Well, I think that's where I would say, at least in my experience around here, like there is very little mobile hunting on private land, guy. I mean, it's always the guy that just wants to walk out to his ladder stand and climb up there. And you see that on public land a lot. And that's, really, I mean, there's probably, just on the piece of property that we hunt, there's probably still 150 stands out there. I mean, you can't walk into the woods without finding stands, but I'd say that that's not the common way on private land would be to like bounce around. And I think it makes sense for setting up your observation stand and, sitting somewhere and then making the move with it. So I guess I didn't even really consider that. But you say, you've had that Lone Wolf setup since you were a kid. Now, back then, it was still almost as expensive as it is today for the regular Lone Wolf stuff. So what do you say to these guys that are saying, well, $500 for a tree stand, like, holy shit, like, and the sticks and all this stuff? It's like, I mean, he was at the show here in Michigan, and we got to see it right at ATA there, and it's a fucking masterpiece. I don't know. I mean, that's the way but it's hard to kind of put that into words, for someone who doesn't, you'll never have to buy another stand. I mean, that's kind of like the way that I look at it.
Yeah, well, you get your guys buying $1,000 bows every year and trading them out just to trade them out. And how bad do you want it, man? I mean, your equipment allows you to do different things. So if I buy a piece of shit stand from Menards or Walmart or whatever you have in your area, and that's the stand you keep on your back, you're very limited in weight and things that it's capable of doing. Especially if there's certain trees you can't make that stand work in, like a hard lean or whatever it may be. it's worth investing. In my opinion, there's just a few things worth dumping hard money into. Honestly, you can wear any camo you want when you're hunting. You can wear any clothing you want. You can wear just earth tones and go out there and kill deer. But if I'm going to dump money into two things, it's good archery equipment and a good stand setup to allow me to move and do what I want to do. If I can't hunt where I want to hunt, what the fuck am I even doing?
Yeah, I'm not a detractor. I just wanted to hear kind of like your opinion on, even from like, it's just interesting to me from a private land guy for like a super high end mobile setup. It's like, well, I mean, you hear guys all the time, well, I used to kill them off of a 2x4. I don't need that. What the fuck ever.
Like, well, cool, then kill them off 2x4s then. That's awesome, dude, because I'm going to have a nice stand. I'm going to move where I want, and I'm going to be comfortable while I do it.
Yeah, and it's it's frustrating. And if you look across anything, it's like, the saddles are super nice. They're $300, and there's not a whole lot to them, but people are eating those up because of social media. And I bought one because I want to see like what it's all about. I think if you're in this,
they're cool as hell, man. It's an effective way to hunt. There's no doubt about it.
And I think if you're in this space and you're going to want to talk intelligently about anything, you kind of have to, put your ass in all of it and say, have at least an educated opinion on it, and just say, well, I'd never buy one because it's $300, or I'd never.
I 100% will. I will saddle hunt this year. Lone Wolf Custom Gear is a partner of ours at Working Class, and I will saddle hunt. I did a podcast with Cody, and I'm like, no, I'm gonna saddle hunt because I want to know what it's like. I want to be able to have that conversation with guys. It's benchmarking essentially. Like, if you know what every type of hunting is, you can actually have a conversation about it. If you've never really messed with one, you're minimal on what type of conversation you can have. But yeah, saddles, dude, that's a super effective way. It's a really light way to hunt, but you still got to have a way to get up the tree where you're not fucking around too much, So it's, in my opinion, stick setups like the Lone Wolf Custom Gear sticks, that's the best type of setup to get up a tree quickly. It's, if you want to be up there, it's four sticks, 4 straps, and they all lock together. I think that's the simplest and cleanest and quietest way to get up a tree.
I mean, they're definitely cool. And I think for me, like I've been going back and forth because it's like I'm kind of at a point where it's like it's going to be one or the other. So I'd love to buy both, but just to drop $1,000 on both of them at one time.
Yeah, it ends up being a lot.
So but I think the stand to me, just like the little features, like you can tell, like everything that they put into it is, I mean, why didn't they think about that before? It's just one of those aha moments, I think, where once you see it, you're like, God damn, that's really something.
Yeah, honestly, man, I did the same thing, dude. Like when they launched AT, I was like, dude, that's expensive, man. And then I went over and saw it. I'm like, oh. I was like, everything I've ever cussed on while hanging a stand, they took care of it.
Well, and for me, like the bow rope is the fucking bane of my existence. I hate every single part about it. It's the most frustrating part, and it doesn't matter if it's retractable, if it's it doesn't matter. I just that portion of it, and the fact that they've got it just integrated in there, it's like, motherfucker, why hasn't this been in everything? Like,
it's so true, because I did the same thing. I'm like, that's the move right there. Like that just saved a lot of guys' lives. Because I'm not. That's my number one thing. Like cheap stands. Me and my dad hang a lot of stands, man. Like not this past season. I got lucky and made the correct moves and half it's luck, half it's just doing some homework. But the year before I struggled. I hung a ton of stands and moved a ton. I earned the nickname Curt Hanging Stands Geier that year. And yeah, dude, the pull-up rope, I was wrapping them around like that shitty top V-bar that attaches to the tree, and like it was all getting tangled that I'm cussing and burning my hands, pulling stands and lowering stand. Yeah, all that. I feel you.
As soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, these guys know what they're doing. Like they've had the same internal conversation. Like, motherfucker, there has to be a better way. Like,
yeah, dude, that's so funny you brought that up. Well, I mean, if you break it down, it's the DeQuistos, man. It's like it's the OGs of hang-on stands. They whether or not you like their stands or not, and you prefer whatever brand, you have to show respect because they're the reason why most of these modern stands, hang-on stands, are here right now.
Well, and that same thing is said for, like you're saying about, like, there's always a lone wolf in your truck. And it's like they haven't lost their value. And the fact that they're still there, if that was that same stand from Menards, like this would have broke or this would have rusted or this would have, it just doesn't have the longevity. And, last year we ran the XOP setups, and I think for the money, like, that is hard to beat. I mean, you can't.
Yeah,
you're never
going
to.
It's the same guys,
right?
It's the same
right.
engineering brain,
right? And that's exactly what I was getting at. Is that for that right there, you can buy a shitty steel stand from wherever, fucking Dick's, Field and Stream, Walmart, for $100, and for $150 you can have a Vanish that you'll never break or outgrow, or it's always going to be one of those tried and true things that you can just that it's going to work. And that's probably expensive to some people too, but you just buy it once.
Yeah, well, it just depends, man. Like, going back to what you're saying, how some people don't even think about shooting big bucks. They're there, they just go to the stand, and really hunting's not really about getting on big deer. It's more about the camaraderie and, like, the Americana tradition of just doing it, kind of like the Escabana and the Moonlight, like that movie. Like, they're more there for, like, the camaraderie. The guy wants his first buck, but it's more about, like, getting together, bringing food to camp, having some beers. Like, that's awesome. But there's some people that strive to kill the big bucks and do all that thing. So it just depends on what you want out of it. And when I started hunting, it was about the camaraderie of deer camp and all that. And I was fortunate enough to have some major big buck killers in camp that kind of took bow hunting to the next level. And they influenced me when I was a youngster, and it kind of, like, took me to that next level to want to be that big buck killer, or I'm still striving to be that big buck killer. And I've just had a ton of fun doing it. But it depends on how you grow up and who you grew up around and what type of hunting you want to do. If you don't want to strive and hang and hunt and kill, like, put that crazy grind in to kill big bucks, and you just want to be that dude that goes out and hunts and has fun and goes back and drinks 12 beers and then sleeps and gets up and goes and hunts the easy stand, like, that's fine too. It just depends on what you really want to do with it. I'm looking up Steve right now as I said that.
Well, and that's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, is that, the Steve portion of the Working Class Bowhunter. I mean, Steve's buck this year was like...
You want me to turn his mic on? Because he's just been kicking it right here, just relaxing.
Yeah, sure. I mean...
Here, pull your mic up, Steve, and I'll turn your mic on. That way it's not... You're live. There I am.
Oh, great.
Howdy.
Keep your, comedic value to yourself. We're having an adult
I'll see what I
conversation
can do.
over here. No, I was just saying, like, your buck this year was great. I mean, for all intents and purposes, not the 150 buck that I'm used to seeing on the Working Class Bowhunter feed. I mean, you guys are posting, your buddy shooting 200s and stuff like that. But the smile, the fact that it was your first buck, the kind of, like, the way that the whole thing went down, that kind of lends to that new hunter recruitment, that whole thing. So I guess how does it feel to get that monkey off your back for?
Well, yeah, all right. So, what you did say was true. There is a 150-inch deer behind every tree. Well, I shot the sumbitch in a field, right? So he was just out there. I'll tell you what. If you go back and listen to our podcast at that time, I was working a lot of I worked second shift, so I worked 4 p.m. to 2 a.m., an hour away from home. So I didn't really get to hunt afternoons that early October, but every Friday I knew I would get off Friday at 2 a.m., head to the stand, and just hunt. And I put a lot of effort in. And I remember this deer coming out in the field, and it had antlers. And the previous 3 weeks prior, I shot a deer, wounded it, didn't wound it that bad because Curt came out and we looked for this buck, and it wasn't a very big buck, but I knew I wanted to put antler on the ground. Didn't find it. Ended up killing a deer the next week. And then this week, it was a feeling that I don't think I'll ever recreate. Maybe if I shoot a world record, I might. But the fact that I saw this deer, I saw antlers, and my heart was absolutely thumping. I never gave it a second thought. I saw him. I knew I was going to shoot him, and I drilled him. One of the coolest moments was going and getting that deer and Curt being right there. We're on the blood trail. It was exhilarating, man. I'll tell you what, it was great. And it made me want to strive for more. I still can't tell you to this day, if I see another deer like that, if he comes out in front of me, if I won't shoot him, but it definitely made me, want more than I thought I wanted. I don't know. I'm sure that makes sense to everybody listening, but any new hunters, when you walk up on that deer that has antlers that you just put on the ground, that you're proud of, I was so proud of that deer. I will be proud of that deer. I'm about to call my taxidermist to find out, because I got him shoulder mounted. I want to hang that deer in my living room with pride, because I put some effort in, and this is what I got. And if anybody's going to be like, whoa, shut him on private land. Oh, he's only 90 inches. Like, dude, leading up to it.
Well, that's Exhibit A, man.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of what we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Right.
It leads into it. Man, this is the first ground that I ever hunted. And I've now hunted a couple other, maybe 2 other private pieces. But this was the
you
first.
hunted a lot of private or public ground too in Iowa.
I did. Yeah, when I lived in Iowa, I hunted some public ground. But this land was like, I don't know, sacred to me. You know, I've had a little bit of deer camp experience. It was something to me that, man, I'll never forget. I'll never forget the few moments leading up to when that deer came in, and the few moments of recovering that deer. Everything else in between that was kind of a blur. You know, kind of wondering, is he really down? You know, Curt showing up. Well, there was another memorable moment when Curt showed up, but it's that moment that I'll hold. And yeah, that deer will be a proud piece in any living room that I ever live in. It was special to me, man.
That's the way it should be too. I mean, that was your first buck, you know, and I mean, and you got it mounted. That's awesome. And for anyone that, you know, wants to put that shit down, they can just go, you know, take a flying leap. And it's bullshit when people act like that.
Well, yeah, true. And that's like kind of, so we have 3 main hosts on Working Class. It's myself, Steve, and Eric. And we all have our different, like, unique qualities. But like, we give Steve a ton of shit because he usually brings it on himself.
Yeah, I'm a piece of shit. Yeah, it is what it is.
But he also plays that role of like and I think maybe we gave him too hard a time because we didn't like. It took us a minute. Like, oh yeah, Steve's just the hunting camp dude. Like that's his like niche. He just likes to spend time in hunting camp with the boys. Like hunting is on his radar. Of course, he wants to kill a big deer. Of course, but it's less of a priority as it is just having fun in hunting camp. So it's easy to give Steve shit, but that's part of the fun of hunting camp is giving your buddy shit. Right. So we kind of play the niche of each person pretty good. But Steve killing that buck, it was a pretty cool experience, man.
I'm glad you were there, Curt. We've talked about it numerous times. I'll talk about it on every podcast that pops up within the next 2 years.
So Steve,
gladly.
You live in like a weird space, right? Because I mean, like kind of what I was saying, where it seems like, well, everybody's killing, 150 if you're in Iowa, Illinois, but then that's got to be hard enough starting out as a new hunter there. And then you decide to get into a fucking, bow hunting podcast, and you're bringing in all the people from TV and all this other shit, and you're seeing all these big deer. So what do you have what would you say to the new hunter? Because I know for a fact that we've got a lot of listeners that are just making that transition from private land to public land, or trying to kill their first deer with a bow, or kill their first buck with a bow. We kind of have always said here, and my father-in-law, he's like, you got to get a few under your belt. But what do you say to those guys that are, if you're on Instagram or whatever, everybody kills a 150. I mean, I shot a 60-inch buck, or I don't know, a little small 6-point on my family's property, and I was like slow playing putting it out, and I happened to kill a 100-inch buck on public land while I was slow playing putting that buck on social media. And my wife's like, "Are you embarrassed of that buck?" I'm like, "No, I'm trying to fucking create content here, and I fucked up by shooting this other deer." It's like I couldn't do that. But how do you what do you say to those the newer hunters, or the guys that are still trying to close that gap? Because like I said, you're surrounded by these giant deer like on a daily or weekly basis.
Oh yeah. You got to ask those hunters, tell them to ask themselves, hey, how much joy do you get in seeing what other people kill? And then how much joy do you get in seeing what you kill? If you get greater joy in seeing what they kill, and you can be okay with that, then great. If you get the amount of joy that deer that I harvested, man, I got more joy than most of my buddies killing big deer, because it was something that I accomplished. I did that. I planted that food plot. I sat in that blind, and I put some hours in to where I killed that deer. If you want to worry about inches, pass on deer. But if you want to feel accomplished, or you want to be proud of something that you did, then do it, man. I will not be embarrassed.
That might be the greatest snippet of sound clip of any podcast Steve has ever laid out. Honestly, that was good. It's true though. Like, that's the truth right there.
It was such a fun story, and it was such a fun hunt, a fun recovery, and that deer is awfully delicious, and I cannot wait till he's in my living room, and I'm sitting there watching probably Trailer Park Boys on Netflix and looking up at that deer and just like, man, life is good. Because, dude,
all right, at the kickback at your new place.
At the new place. It's just, man, don't be embarrassed about your accomplishments. If I can tell any new hunter that, don't be embarrassed about shit, because you see these guys killing this shit on social media.
Hey, can I give a perfect example?
Yeah.
When our podcast is being filmed, our video podcast series, my first buck ever sits right next to me in the studio, and I could pull one of my bigger bucks and put him right here for everyone to see on film, but I don't. I have him in the living room. My first buck ever is on film for every video podcast we do, and honestly, not one person has said shit about it.
No,
because it's not a big deer.
Still bigger than mine, that shot.
That's why I put it in video. But like Steve's point, be proud of what you do and just do what makes you happy.
And I think that's what we try to, exude, is like, we're nothing special. We go out there and we're just trying to inspire people to just say like, hey, it's fine. Shoot whatever you want. This is what we shot. This is what he shot. This is, but we're out there doing it, having fun and learning as we go. And it allows us, to pick the brains of people like yourself, or, anybody that we have on the podcast, to try and inspire those other people, for Steve to say, I mean, I posted that picture today of Curt with a 190-inch set of shed antlers. It'd be real easy for Steve to look at the buck that he shot and say, well, these guys are killing that. But it's like, fuck that. Every animal that you harvest with a bow is a trophy, and that's why we do it. And so you could nitpick everything. The stick bow guys could say, well, fuck, you didn't kill that. That's not a real bow. This is a bow. And then I use stone broadheads, and fucking I use, it's a bunch of bullshit. The whole hunter infighting thing is like, we need to be more accepting than I think social media allows us to be. There's a bunch of bullies out there.
It is, man, but we're all the same team. You know, I've talked about different, and people take. I've done a lot of podcasts, so guess what I'm getting to. Done a lot of podcasts, and I say things that might be seen as controversial or might be seen as one thing. A lot of times, I'm just trying to poke fun at people who get offended at nothing, and I think that's hilarious. But really, it's like just certain things need to be talked about, and if you're offended by them, maybe we all just need to take a step back and kind of look at it. I don't know. It's all good. If you hunt public land, you kill a big buck. I do think there's a notch cooler that you have than killing a buck on private. Like, I get that whole thing. But at the same time, don't knock me for my hustle on killing big deer on private, because it's a different type of skill and it's a little bit different type of hustle, because I would challenge those same people to come to my private and do the same thing. And I think they would find very quickly that it's not a walk-on. And you go in and you shoot it the first night. It's not that way. And I mean, I think you could watch any video. It's weird that we have to talk about it like this. I think you can watch any hunting video. I mean, Lee Lukoski, you know, that's the farm everyone thinks about when they think Iowa. You know, he has videos of him when they do like a montage of every interview he did of every morning for all the days he hunted. It's day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 30, day 31, 30, you know. And he's grinding out to kill the deer he wants to kill. And, you know, he's on a different spectrum from anybody else. You know, he's looking for the giants, super giants. But he's passing 130, 140, 150, 160-inch deer because he has put the work in to let those deer be there. I don't have that. I don't have the balls to let a 150-inch deer walk by me. I'm killing that motherfucker. So it's a different. It's all different. It's all perspective. It's all how you lay things out for yourself. So I don't think anybody has grounds to hate on anybody else.
For sure. And that, you know, that's kind of why I wanted to have you on here, because I don't get that perspective, and I don't think that we have enough of that. You know, on our podcast, we talk to public land guys and we talk about our exploits on public land or small tract, private, you know, here in Michigan or maybe the surrounding areas, like a little bit. So like I say, I just wanted to kind of get that perspective. I heard you talk about it a little bit after like 19,000 beers on the East Coast Bowhunter podcast.
Not good.
So, and Steve, I did not hear you on that podcast. There was something, you had some sand somewhere or something that you couldn't make that podcast.
Oh, no. I got that flu that kept me out for 2 days, and then I believe that Curt got it like a couple days later.
Yeah.
That was
No, I got it the next day.
You got it.
I woke up. I thought I was just hungover. I woke up, and I was like, oh, I'm dying. And no, I had the flu. I'm not kidding. I woke up the next day from that podcast you guys are talking about, like just dead.
Man, that was I've never been that sick before in my life, and that flu took a lot of people out. It was not a good one.
It's a brutal year, boys. It's a brutal year.
Man.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I wanted to have you on here and kind of just get the perspective from, you know, someone who is in this space, talks to a lot of different people, whether it's public land or private land. And, you know, you guys hunt, you know, the Mecca from, you know, everybody in Michigan, like, oh, if I was in Iowa, it'd be just this easy. And, you know, I just wanted to get kind of that
Come
perspective.
to Iowa and hunt then.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, you got to buy points and all that stuff. It's that, you know, Michigans are lazy hunters. That's why it is the kind of
Well,
like
it's just like anyone that does that type of thing. I'm not just picking on people from Michigan that do that. If you're from, name the state, Pennsylvania. If you're from Wyoming, I don't know, wherever. If you're that dude bitching and that's what you want to do, like Illinois is over the counter. You can come hunt here. You know, Iowa, you got to build a couple points, but I think Illinois is over the counter, Wisconsin's over the counter, Missouri's over the counter, Kentucky, Ohio.
Yeah, Ohio's over the counter.
You know, you can get after it. You know, it's how bad do you want it? If you want to be that dude who hunts like a lazy ass and then bitch about other people shooting 150s because they're on every other tree, bro, that's their own fault.
This is not exclusive to the hunting world. In the stand-up comedy world, it is the same way. I've done stand-up with a bunch of guys that are like, man, if I was just in Chicago, dude, I'd be killing. I'd be over. I'd be making money. It's like, we'll go to Chicago. It's 2.5 hours away. Oh, if we were out in L.A., I'd be doing mics every night. I'd be getting paid. We'll go out to L.A. You know, there's that. what's going to set you apart and what I've learned over the years is you have to have a certain drive about you. You have to want something. I have went through a lot of shit and I've changed my life around. And recently in the past 4 months, I put like 4 months of work in. I've lost like 40 pounds. I got money in the bank because I wanted it more than I did. Like
You're going to kill 180 this year.
Yeah, and I've wanted something, and I went out and I worked hard, and I got it. Within 4 months, I'm like, okay, if I did that in 4 months, I made some changes, and I just chased something, you can get it. So if you're on public land, private land, man, if you want it enough, it's out there. And that I'm not telling you that from experience. I'm telling you that because I know that for a fact because I've wanted a couple things.
Would be experience.
And now I've changed. Well, you know what I mean. But I'm not experienced in the woods. I'm just saying because I've done a couple things to get what I want.
This year he wants a Pope and Young. He's going to get after it.
I just want, and I've said this on a couple podcasts, I want to target a specific buck and go after it and kill it. And you know what? That's exactly what I'm going to do.
You're saying like year-and-a-half-year-old.
Oh, yeah. Dude, if I get a fork buck with a limp, it's over for him. You know what I mean?
You need to talk to my father-in-law.
I'm patterning that sumbitch since September. I'm like, yo, dude, he's limping out in the bean field every night at 6. He's done. But I'm saying, man, it's all about how much do you want it, and I want some stuff, so I'm gonna go after and get it.
Well, I would say go to Ohio because, and this is just for any of your listeners that we might pick up from, that want to hear you guys talk, but I tripped into a 150 in Ohio, and that was before I was really, really hunting or knowing what I was doing. So just so you know, it can be done, Steve. They are around every corner in Ohio.
Every corner.
So, yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed talking with you guys tonight. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I really appreciate the time and the banter, and Steve's actually contributing to the conversation. I did appreciate that as well.
Weird.
So, again, if anybody hasn't figured out where you guys are, who you guys are, where can they find you, and maybe even Steve, you can plug your bullshit comedy stuff too if you want.
Yeah. Yes. I love that. WorkingClassBowhunter.com, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter's dead. Carbon TV, the usual. Find us there. This book. MySpace, Zanga,
Zanga,
Tinder, Bumble.
Yeah, I'm on Tinder and Bumble. Apparently, Curt made a Grindr account for me. So, hey guys, most Michigan hunters are on Grindr. I'll just throw it out there. I'm kidding.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Yep.
All right.
Kind of all we got for this evening. So, thanks for being here.
You guys didn't feed into any of those jokes.
No, they did not. God, I'm worried now.
Shut up and sit down.